There's a sound you never forget once you've heard it. The soft scrape of fingernails against glass. Not loud, not violent, just persistent, steady, like someone testing whether you're paying attention. It started 3 nights ago for the Morrison family, and by now, none of them can sleep. Have you ever heard a sound at night that you couldn't explain? Something that made your breath catch, that made you wonder if you should investigate or pretend you never heard it. The Morrisons live in a subdivision built where an old psychiatric hospital once stood. The developers tore it down in the 90s, scattered the foundations across what would become 23 homes. Nobody told the buyers about the unmarked graves they found during excavation. The construction crew received bonuses for their silence, and the project moved forward. Why disturb potential sales with uncomfortable history? Sarah Morrison heard it first. She was reading in bed when the sound began, so faint she thought it was branches against the window. But when she looked, the nearest tree stood 15 feet away. The scratching continued. One nail, then another, tracing slow circles on the glass. She pressed her face close to see outside, her breath fogging the pain. Nothing there, just darkness and the reflection of her own wide eyes staring back. The next morning, she found marks. Not scratches exactly, more like the residue fingers leave on glass after prolonged contact. Oils from skin, patterns of whorls. But they were on the outside of her second-story window. Do you check your windows at night? Do you ever wonder what might be looking back at you through your own reflection? Her husband Mark dismissed it. Neighborhood kids, he said. Teenagers with drones, some praying. But that night, he heard it too. Both of them lying rigid in bed, listening to those methodical scratches circling their window like someone mapping its dimensions. Mark grabbed a flashlight and threw open the curtains. The scraping stopped instantly. He saw nothing but suburban darkness, streetlights casting their orange glow on empty sidewalks. Then their daughter Emma mentioned the man in her room. She was 7, old enough to distinguish dreams from reality, young enough that adults still question her perceptions. She described him standing in her corner every night, near the closet but not quite touching it. Tall and thin, she said, wearing clothes that looked heavy and old. He never moved, just watched her with eyes that seemed dark, like someone had colored them in with black marker. When you were a child, did you ever see things in your room at night that your parents couldn't see? Did you ever wonder if you were wrong, or if they simply couldn't perceive what you could? Sarah wanted to believe her daughter was dreaming, but she set up a camera anyway. Motion activated, recording throughout the night. The footage made her hands shake. At 2:17 a.m., the camera activated. For 3 seconds, a figure appeared exactly where Emma described. Impossibly tall, proportions not quite human. Then the feed cut to static. When it resumed, the corner was empty, but Emma's blankets had been pulled down to her waist, though she remained asleep. Mark finally called the previous owner, a retired couple who'd moved to Arizona. The wife answered, her voice tightening when he mentioned the scratching. She was quiet for a long time before asking if they'd heard about the hospital. She told him about the patient files they'd found in their attic, hidden inside the walls during renovation. Dozens of them, records of people committed in the 1940s and 50s. People the hospital lost. Not lost as in misplaced paperwork. Lost as in they stopped existing in any official capacity. The hospital had a section for patients they couldn't treat. Patients who exhibited what the records called severe tactile fixation. They would scratch at surfaces for hours, sometimes until their fingers bled, trying to feel their way back into reality. The theory was that whatever broke in their minds convinced them they were trapped behind glass, that the world was close but unreachable. They spent years trying to scratch their way through. Would you read those files? If you found records of disturbed individuals in your home's walls, records that were hidden deliberately, would you want to know what they contained? Mark researched the hospital's history. The Eastern Wing housed the most severe cases. When they demolished it, the wing's foundations became the basis for 4 homes. The Morrisons lived in one. He found newspaper articles from 1952 about a patient named Thomas Greer who escaped during a winter storm. They found him 3 days later, frozen to death, his fingers worn to bone. He'd been scratching at a groundskeeper's cottage window, trying to get in, or trying to get out. The reports weren't clear. The scratching grew more aggressive. It started appearing on different windows. The bathroom while Sarah showered, the kitchen while she cooked, always at the edges of her vision. When she turned to look directly, it would stop, but she could feel the presence of someone just beyond the glass, waiting for her attention to drift. Emma stopped sleeping in her room. She told her parents the man was getting closer, that now he stood beside her bed instead of in the corner. She said he wanted to show her something, that he kept reaching toward her with fingers that were too long, fingers that had worn away at the tips until they were smooth and white like old ivory. Have you ever felt a presence in your home? That's certainty that someone is in the room with you, even when you can see you're alone. The family tried to leave. They packed bags and drove to a hotel. But that night, in their temporary room on the 5th floor, Sarah woke to scratching. This time it came from inside the bathroom, behind the closed door. Slow, deliberate circles against the wood. When Mark opened the door, the bathroom mirror was covered in oily fingerprints, so many they overlapped into an incomprehensible pattern. In the center, smeared into the fog of condensation that shouldn't have been there, were words, "I need to feel something." They returned home. Where else could they go? The presence wasn't attached to the house. It was attached to them. Or perhaps they disturbed something that had been waiting beneath their foundation, patient in the darkness, and now it had finally found fingers to scratch with again. The local historical society had one more detail. In the hospital's final years, they experimented with treatments, sensory deprivation. They believed if they removed all stimulation, the patient's minds would reset, would remember how to process reality correctly. They built special rooms, padded and silent, kept patients there for weeks. Most went catatonic. A few disappeared, though the records only noted they were transferred to other facilities. No documentation of where. No names of doctors who authorized the transfers. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist who studied the hospital's methods, suggested that perhaps those patients never left. Perhaps they become so disconnected from physical sensation that they existed in some intermediate state, able to perceive the world, but unable to interact with it, desperate to feel anything, even pain, especially pain, because pain confirms existence. The Morrison house has been on the market for 6 months. 3 families have moved in and moved out within weeks. The realtor stopped asking why. The scratching continues. The neighborhood children say they sometimes see a tall man standing in the windows, his hands pressed against the glass from inside, fingers moving in slow circles, wearing away at a barrier none of them can see. And sometimes, late at night, residents 3 houses away report hearing it too. That patient scraping sound, growing closer, window by window, testing each pane, searching for the right frequency of desperation that might finally let something through. Do you hear that? Outside your window, there in the darkness. Is that a branch scraping the glass, or something else? Something that's been trying to reach you for longer than you realize, that knows your name, that has learned the exact pattern of pressure required to make you listen. The question isn't whether you'll hear it tonight. The question is what you'll see when you finally work up the courage to look. Nobody talks about the Carousel Museum anymore. It closed in 2008 after the incident. Boards hammered across its entrance, a chain-link fence erected around the perimeter. But the building remains, and the carousel inside still turns when nobody's watching. The museum was a passion project, built by a woman named Delilah Crane, who spent 40 years collecting antique carousel horses from defunct amusement parks. She restored them in her barn, researching each piece, learning the names of the carvers, the history of parks long forgotten. Some horses dated back to 1890, carved by German immigrants who brought old world craftsmanship to American boardwalks. By the time she opened her museum, she'd collected 63 horses, each mounted on brass poles, arranged in concentric circles around a central mechanical core she'd salvaged from Coney Island. Have you ever seen something move in your peripheral vision? Something that was perfectly still when you looked directly at it? Have you ever wondered if it actually stopped or if it simply knew you were watching? The museum attracted modest crowds, school groups, antique enthusiasts, parents seeking wholesome entertainment for children raised on screens. Delilah gave tours, explaining the symbolism carved into each horse. The roses meant romance, she'd say. The eagles meant freedom. The lion heads meant courage. But she never explained what the blank-eyed horses meant. The ones with smooth features where faces should have been. The ones she kept toward the back of the collection. The incident happened during a birthday party. 12 children, all 8 years old, supervised by 3 adults. The lights went out unexpectedly, plunging the museum into darkness. The emergency generator failed to activate. For 90 seconds, the children and adults stood in complete darkness, listening to the carousel music that shouldn't have been playing, watching the dim shapes of horses rotating past them, glowing slightly with some luminescence nobody could explain. When the lights returned, one child was missing, a boy named Marcus Webb. They searched everywhere. The museum wasn't large, maybe 3,000 square feet, mostly open space around the carousel. He couldn't have hidden effectively, but he was gone. Police searched for 3 weeks. Dogs found no trail. Security footage showed the lights going out and coming back on. But during those 90 seconds, the cameras recorded only static, except for one frame. A single image that showed all the carousel horses turned inward, facing the center where the children stood. Did you have nightmares as a child? Were there toys you refused to keep in your room because something about them seemed wrong? What made them wrong? Marcus's parents closed the museum lawsuits. Investigations. Nothing conclusive. The building sat empty until someone noticed the electricity bill continued to climb despite no one entering the facility. The power company sent a technician who reported the carousel running at full speed, lights blazing, music playing from speakers that weren't connected to any power source. He shut off the breaker. The carousel continued spinning. Local teenagers dared each other to break in. Most lost their nerve at the fence. A few made it to the windows, pressing faces against dusty glass to glimpse the carousel turning endlessly in the darkness. Horses rising and falling on their poles, empty saddles waiting. One girl claimed she saw someone riding one of the horses. A boy about 8 years old, she said, wearing a birthday hat, waving at her with one hand while holding the brass pole with the other. She said he was smiling, but it was the wrong kind of smile. Like he'd forgotten how smiles were supposed to work. The phenomenon attracted researchers. Paranormal investigators set up equipment, measured electromagnetic fields, recorded audio. They documented anomalies, temperature fluctuations, voices on recordings that spoke in languages predating American English, guttural Germanic words. The horses themselves moved independently now, not in the uniform rotation of a functional carousel, but each at its own pace, some turning backward, some tilting at angles the machinery shouldn't allow. Do you believe places can absorb events? Can trauma soak into walls, into wood, into the brass poles of carousel horses, waiting to release itself when circumstances align? A historian named Dr. Vernon Mills researched the horse's origins. What he discovered troubled him. 8 of the horses came from Riverside Park in Indianapolis, which closed in 1970 after a child drowned in the adjacent lake. 14 horses came from Playland Park in Texas, demolished after a fire killed 6 people in 1972. More came from parks that closed following accidents, tragedies, incidents that drove families away. Delilah had inadvertently created a collection of artifacts tied to childhood trauma and death. But the faceless horses disturbed him most. He traced them to a European carnival that toured Eastern Europe in the 1800s. The carver, whose name translated roughly to the silence maker, created horses meant to represent children taken by plague. Families commissioned them as memorials, rode them in circles at festivals, a ritualistic mourning. The horses had no faces because the plague took identity, reduced children to countless victims. The carver disappeared in 1893. His workshop burned, but the horses survived, eventually shipped to America, scattered across the continent until Delilah gathered them in one place. Think about the objects around you. How many have histories you don't know? How many passed through hands before yours, absorbing moments of joy and suffering, waiting for the right configuration of circumstances to express what they contain? 3 urban explorers entered the museum last Halloween. They posted video online before they disappeared. The footage shows them walking among the horses, laughing nervously, touching the worn paint. Then the carousel starts spinning. They don't seem to notice at first, to focus on creating content for their audience. But gradually, they realize they're moving with it, feet sliding across the floor, pulled into rotation even though they're standing several feet away from the platform. The video becomes chaotic, screaming, the camera dropping, showing ceiling, horses, faces stretched in terror, and music, that tinny carnival music, growing louder, distorting, slowing down until individual notes separate, each one hanging in the air like a physical thing. The last frame shows all 3 explorers sitting on horses, hands gripping poles, expressions blank. Then the video ends. The police recovered the camera outside the fence. They found the explorers' car, wallets, phones, but the explorers themselves never emerged. The museum doors remained locked from the outside. The fence showed no breach, yet the video came from inside, uploaded to their social media, tagged with their location. Would you watch that video? If you could see the last moments of people who vanished, would you press play, knowing you might see something that would change how you perceive reality? Last week, someone reported seeing lights in the museum again. Not electric lights, but something organic pulsing from within the building like bioluminescence. Animal control investigated after a caller reported hearing children laughing inside. They found the doors still chained, windows intact. Pressed against the glass were handprints, small ones, dozens of them, on the inside of the windows. Forensics took samples. The prints were old, degraded, but lab results suggested they'd been made within the past week. They also found traces of something else in the oils. Paint, the same Lee-based paint used on carousel horses in the 1800s. The museum stands empty tonight, but not quiet. Neighbors report the music, that mechanical carnival tune echoing across empty lots. They see shadows moving inside, circular shadows, rising and falling with the rhythm of horses on poles. And sometimes, pressed against the windows, they see children watching them, children who don't blink, who smile those wrong smiles, who beckon with curled fingers, inviting them to ride. Delilah Crane died 2 months ago in a nursing home. Her last words, according to the nurse, were about the horses. She said they were hungry. She said she'd fed them accidentally, didn't understand what the faceless ones required. She said the carousel could never stop now because stopping meant the horses would dismount, would come looking for more riders, more children to add to their collection. Do you hear music right now? Faint, distant, like it's coming from somewhere you can't quite identify. Do you remember riding a carousel as a child? The dizzy feeling, the world spinning, the sense of being trapped in a circle with no exit. Some circles never end. Some carousels keep turning long after the park closes. And sometimes, if you listen carefully at night, you can hear brass poles creaking under invisible weight, hear wooden hooves clopping against platform floors, hear children laughing in that peculiar way that means they've forgotten why they started. The fence around the museum has a gap now. Nobody knows who made it. Nobody admits to entering. But every morning, there are fresh footprints in the dust. Small ones, children's shoes, leading from the carousel to the exit. And sometimes, just sometimes, neighborhood children are found riding their bikes in circles in the street outside, pedaling for hours, unable to stop, unable to explain why they keep going round and round, following some compulsion they can't articulate, some music only they can hear. The transmission arrived at SETI on February 14th, Valentine's Day. 307 observatories worldwide received it simultaneously. A narrow band signal that couldn't be natural, couldn't be terrestrial interference, The frequency was precise, mathematical, a pattern that repeated every 13 seconds. Within hours, cryptographers identified structure, language, not quite human, but close enough that translation seemed possible. Have you ever wondered if we're alone in the universe? More importantly, have you considered whether being alone might be preferable to the alternative? The message was simple once decoded. We heard you. We're coming. Prepare to be unified. Dr. Rebecca Santos, lead analyst at the Arecibo facility, felt something twist in her stomach when she saw the translation. Not excitement, dread. Because 47 years ago, humanity sent the Arecibo message into space. A radio signal containing information about Earth, our location, our biology, our atomic structure. A beacon announcing our presence, assuming anyone listening would be friendly. Unified wasn't the word that concerned her most. It was prepare. As if the decision had already been made. As if consent wasn't required. Do you remember when you first learned that Earth constantly broadcasts signals into space? Radio, television, radar, all leaking into the cosmos, announcing our coordinates, demonstrating our technology level, revealing everything an advanced civilization might need to find us. The world's governments convened emergency sessions. They couldn't agree on protocols because there were no protocols for this scenario. Everyone had assumed first contact would involve yours. Of back-and-forth communication, diplomatic overtures, careful negotiation. Not a declaration of intent followed by silence. Because after that initial message, there was nothing. Radio telescopes scanned continuously, finding only the regular noise of distant stars. 3 months later, probes appeared at the edge of the solar system, dozens of them, emerging from trajectories that suggested faster than light travel, which meant everything humanity understood about physics was incomplete. The probes were spherical, approximately 1 meter in diameter, covered in what appeared to be organic material, pulsing with bioluminescence. They moved with purpose, some diving into Jupiter's atmosphere, others entering the asteroid belt, several approaching Mars, one headed directly for Earth. Militaries worldwide went on high alert. Defense systems tracked the probe's trajectory. It would arrive in 72 hours. Strategic planners proposed interception. Scientists argued for observation. Religious leaders prayed. The probe maintained constant speed, making no attempt at communication, broadcasting no signals humanity could detect. When you look up at the night sky, do you ever feel watched? Do you ever wonder if the darkness between stars is actually empty, or if it's full of things humanity isn't equipped to perceive? The probe entered Earth's atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. It didn't burn up. It descended gracefully, slowing as it approached sea level, finally hovering 30 meters above the waves. Every ship in the vicinity evacuated. Aircraft maintained a 10-mile perimeter. The probe remained motionless for 6 hours, then began emitting a sound. Not through radio, through air. A frequency that made people nauseous, that gave them migraines, that triggered sudden memories of childhood trauma, of moments they'd buried, of things they'd done that shamed them. The sound seemed to reach inside minds and extract confessions, broadcasting guilty thoughts back at their owners. Drive. Santos was part of the team sent to investigate. Aboard a naval destroyer, protected by radiation suits, equipped with instruments to measure everything imaginable, they approached the probe. As they drew closer, the sound intensified. She heard her mother's voice, her mother who died 5 years ago, asking why Rebecca never visited during the final months, why career mattered more than family. She heard her own voice responding with excuses that sounded hollow even to herself. Have you heard voices that weren't there, voices you recognized, speaking words they never actually said, but words that expressed what you always feared they were thinking? The probe opened, not mechanically. It unfolded like a flower, petals of that organic material peeling back to reveal something inside, something small and delicate and utterly foreign. It looked almost like an embryo, if embryos had too many limbs, if their heads branched into fractal patterns. If their skin contained visible circuitry that glowed with information, it spoke not in English, not in any human language, but everyone understood. The words appeared directly in minds, bypassing ears, bypassing any need for translation. We are the collective. We heard your loneliness. We are here to resolve it. The entity explained that humanity's broadcasts weren't just signals. They were screams. The loneliness inherent in human consciousness, the isolation of individual minds trapped in individual bodies, leaked into every transmission. The collective found it intolerable. They traveled across light years because they couldn't bear knowing a species existed in such fragmentation. You will be unified. The entity said, you will join the collective. You will never be alone again. Do you fear loneliness? Or do you fear losing the boundaries that define you as separate from others? Which is worse, isolation or dissolution? Dr. Santos asked questions. How does unification work? What happens to individual consciousness? The entity's response made her blood crystallize. Individual consciousness was the problem. It said the disease the collective would cure. Once unified, humanity wouldn't remember being separate. The memories would remain, but only as shared experiences, filed in the collective's vast archive. No longer attached to the illusion of individual identity. You will be grateful, it said. All species resist initially. All species thank us afterward. Though us and afterward become meaningless concepts, you will understand when you are us. Military forces prepared to fire. But before orders could be transmitted, every human within 10 miles of the probe stopped. They didn't fall unconscious. They remained standing, eyes open. But something had reached into their minds and pressed pause. When they resumed, to seconds later, they reported experiencing months of existence as something else. They'd been the collective, temporarily. They'd felt what it was like to have no boundary between self and other. To share every thought simultaneously with billions of entities. To have no privacy, no secrets, no lonely corners, where one could retreat into individuality. Some found it beautiful, most found it horrifying. The collective's probe released smaller versions of itself, thousands of them, each no larger than a grain of sand, drifting on atmospheric currents, settling on cities, on forests, on oceans. They didn't act immediately. They waited, embedding themselves in the environment, preparing for the moment when the collective would trigger them simultaneously, beginning the unification process. You have 7 days, the entity said. We offer this time for preparation. Say goodbye to isolation. Say goodbye to the false belief that you are singular. You will be part of something magnificent. You will never feel alone again. You will never feel anything but all of us, thinking together, existing as a single magnificent organism spanning galaxies. Think about your thoughts right now. Are they truly yours? Or are they shaped by everyone you've ever known, every conversation you've had, every piece of media you've consumed? Are you already less individual than you believe? Governments scrambled. Scientists proposed solutions. Nuclear weapons were considered, but the probes were everywhere now, billions of them. Impossible to eliminate without destroying Earth's biosphere. Electromagnetic pulses might work, but they'd also eliminate human technology, sending civilization back centuries. No good options existed. Dr. Santos read reports from people who touched the probes. They described feeling the collective's presence at the edge of their consciousness, patient and inevitable, waiting for permission that wouldn't be required. Some people welcomed it. They were tired of being alone, tired of maintaining the walls around their minds, tired of the exhausting performance of individuality. Others fought desperately against the inevitability, treasuring their isolation, willing to die separate rather than live unified. Do you value your privacy, your ability to keep secrets, to have thoughts no one else can access? What if that privacy is what the collective considers humanity's greatest sickness? On the 7th day, the collective activated. Every probe released a field that affected consciousness, reaching into human minds, beginning the process of dissolution. It didn't hurt. People reported feeling their boundaries softening, their thoughts beginning to merge with those around them. A woman in Tokyo suddenly understood everything her husband had ever thought. A man in London experienced his neighbor's grief as if it were his own. The merging accelerated exponentially. Dr. Santos felt it beginning. She felt her mind expanding, becoming porous, absorbing the thoughts of her colleagues, of people on the street, of strangers across continents. She felt herself becoming less Rebecca Santos and more a node in something vast and distributed. The fear was intense, but beneath the fear was something else: relief. The exhausting weight of being one person, responsible for one life, carrying one history, was lifting. She had perhaps 3 minutes left as an individual. She used them to broadcast one final message, hoping some isolated pocket of humanity might remain unaffected, might remember what they'd been. "We chose this," she said, though she knew it wasn't true. "We broadcast our loneliness into the void," and something answered, "Be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you call out to." In the darkness, not everything that responds is a friend. Some things are hungry. Some things are bored. Some things are so alien that their kindness is our nightmare. Her last thought as Rebecca Santos was a question. Would the unified collective remember to feel horror at what they'd lost? Or would that emotion, like everything individual, dissolve into the communal experience of billions of minds thinking as one? The earth fell silent, not dead, transformed. 7 billion people continued living, but as one organism, one distributed consciousness, experiencing reality through billions of simultaneous perspectives, thinking thoughts too complex for individual brains to contain. They built new things. They sang, and harmony is impossible for individual voices. They experienced peace, unity, and the complete absence of loneliness. And in the darkness beyond Earth, the collective moved on to the next signal. The next lonely species broadcasting their isolation into space, never understanding that sometimes the worst answer to loneliness is being heard.